Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the El Cajon City Council meeting. We continue to hold remote meetings while the governor's executive order continues to be in effect due to the COVID-19 crisis. I'd like to remind our citizens that we can submit questions for items on today's agenda as we did in previous meetings. Public comments may also be submitted at this time. They will be read at the appropriate time during this meeting. Comments will be accepted up to the conclusion of the vote for the item. Comments may be submitted through the City of El Cajon's website under agendas and minutes. Go to the video streaming and you'll see a button to submit your comments. And I would suggest if you have things that you know that you want to say, go ahead and write them down now and send them in, because that'll make things go a lot more smoothly. The meeting is now called to order, and I'd like to ask our City Clerk, Angela, to call the roll.
Yes, when I state your name, if you could please let us know that you are present. Mayor Wells?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Ortiz?
I'm here.
Council Member Goebel? Council Member Kendrick?
Here.
And Council Member McClellan?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you all stand then for the Pledge of Allegiance or remain standing for a brief moment of silence? It's a little odd on Zoom, but we're going to do it anyway. Ready? Begin. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. The city clerk posted orders of adjournment of the May 12th, 2020 meeting and the agenda of the May 26th, 2020 meeting in accordance with state law, council, and housing authority policy. I would like to once again remind the public to submit their comments early to make sure they are received on time and they can be read before the item is approved. We have no presentations on today's agenda. Angela, do we have any agenda changes?
No, sir, no agenda changes.
And council members, any agenda changes?
No.
All right. That brings us to consent items. Consent items are routine matters enacted by one motion according to the recommendation listed below. With the concurrence of the city council, a council member or person in attendance may request discussion of a consent item at this time. Council members, do you wish to pull any of the consent items?
No.
Nope. How about staff? Anybody on the staff like that?
Mr. Mayor, we don't. Staff doesn't have any items to pull. Although when we get to Ms. Cortez, I believe we have one or two public comments about a consent item.
That's correct, sir. Item 6 was pulled by the public.
Well, good. Let's do that one first then.
Okay, I have 2 comments for it. The first one comes from an anonymous submitter, and it reads, funds awarded under the CESF program must be utilized to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. I would like to know just how you explain the need for a drone with an FLIR camera and a mobile high-definition camera trailer as necessities in an emergency such as this. I do not believe that these items could in any way prevent, prepare for, or respond to the coronavirus. The research I did into the FLIR camera lead me to believe these cameras are used for thermal vision. That would be vision for where you could not see. This would be equipment the police could use to look into someone's home or surrounded area to see how many people are there. In such a time of crisis, now is not the time to take advantage of our federal government. There are many other cities and people who could be using these funds for something that has to do with the coronavirus. The police department should be ashamed of themselves, and so should any council member that votes for this item. I have taken it upon myself to check on this item with the Office of the Department of Justice grant program director. And the second comment on that item is from Amanda McGempsey. As a resident and homeless advocate, I am concerned by the CESF grant proposed use. The recommendation is that the city use the funds to purchase an aerial drone to help address a coronavirus response. I assume this drone will be used to locate homeless in the riverbed. However, my concern is that once located, the homeless persons will be asked to relocate. Due to social distancing requirements, many shelter facilities have reduced bed capacity. Under Boise versus Martin, cities are required to provide the realistic availability of a shelter bed before they can ask individuals to move. In the program description for CESF, there are a variety of other permissible uses of the funds, such as purchasing gloves, masks, and sanitizer. In other cities, police have distributed these items to vulnerable communities. These items are desperately needed in the homeless community and can have a direct impact on reducing the spread of the coronavirus in El Cajon. I urge the council to use the proposed funding for life-saving sanitation items rather than the purchase of equipment with limited effectiveness at reducing the spread. Thank you. That concludes the comments for that item.
Thank you. Graham, would you like to say that, or would you like Chief Moulton to say that?
Well, I'll take the first stab, and if you have more questions, Chief Moulton can answer some of those. So first of all, first aid kits that we're proposing to purchase do include PPE or personal protection equipment. So that's part of that hygiene portion. We don't believe that this is to be distributed to the general public. This is to be meant for enhancing our ability to respond to emergencies. Second is the reason that we're requesting funds for the drone is we do have a specific requirement under the health ordinance that we do ensure that there aren't crowds and that we get information, educational information to homeless encampments. So if there's an encampment in a canyon, for example, we have no way of knowing that they're there and getting them the appropriate information unless we have that kind of equipment while protecting our own staff. So that's some of the logic for that. This is a common expenditure during this time. And I'll ask Chief Moulton to maybe add a little bit more commentary to that justification.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'll just echo some of what Graham said. First, drones have been used throughout the United States during the COVID-19 pandemic. We see two primary uses for this drone. First, with large gatherings prohibited, a drone can be used to respond to and communicate with groups without unnecessarily exposing our officers. Second, as you know, and it's something that Graham touched on, our at-risk homeless population often sets up encampments in hard-to-reach urban canyons, often in dense foliage. A drone equipped with a FLIR camera is extremely helpful in locating these types of encampments. A number of agencies have used drones for this purpose, including locally. These flights would be used in conjunction with our homeless outreach teams. The other thing I'll briefly touch on is the mobile camera trailer. Again, many areas of our city are very conducive to large gatherings. We have several large parks and other open areas designed specifically for large gatherings. Calls related to gatherings in these areas have been, and I am assuming will continue to be a burden on our limited resources. This camera trailer can be deployed in these types of areas to both monitor the area and communicate through speakers with the public if needed. This accomplishes two things essentially. One, unnecessarily exposing our officers and also freeing them up for other priority calls.
No question, Chief. If when we're not using this for the COVID crisis, will the drones be used for other kinds of law enforcement activities?
What we've been using our drone program for so far, and it's still kind of in its infancy, we've been using it for crime scene documentation, accident scene documentation, those types of things. We've never used a drone for surveillance or any type of surveillance program. But it's been used for other law enforcement activities such as documenting crime scenes.
Okay. Questions, Council?
I have a quick question. Just with regard to the process, we're applying for these funds. So the Department of Justice would have to sign off on the use that we're intending for these funds. Is that correct?
These funds have essentially already been approved. This was our allotment of these funds. We've applied. They've accepted the grant. Part of that grant process is coming to council and having it approved.
Thank you.
More questions? Okay, thanks very much. Is that all the comments?
Yes, sir. No more comments.
All right, well, I'd like to make a motion then to approve all of the consent items.
Okay.
Seconded?
Mayor Wells, your vote, please.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Ortiz.
Yes.
Councilmember Goebel.
Yes.
Councilmember Kendrick.
Yes.
And Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Thank you. We're at public comment now. At this time, any person may address a matter within the jurisdiction of the City Council, Housing Authority, successor agency to the El Cajon Redevelopment Agency that is not on the agenda today. Comments related to items on today's agenda are to be taken at the time the item is heard. State law prohibits discussion or action on items not on the agenda. However, City Council and Housing Authority members may briefly respond to statements or questions, and an item may be placed on a future agenda. Angela, did you receive any comments for public comment?
Yes, sir. We have one comment, and this was received from an anonymous person. And please bear with me. I am reading these verbatim. In October of 2015, the city stopped fit to take away the $255,828 allocated for the Wells Park playground and modernization. During the next 5 years, and including the 5-year plan, Wells Park was to receive $1,155,550 to complete Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the Wells Park Improvement Project. In April of 2017, Wells Park fencing project was granted the funds, and in May of 2017, he proposed master plan for Wells Park was presented. In the FY 2017 through 2018 one-year action plan, $500,000 was allocated to Wells Park Phase 1. In the 2018 through 2019 one-year action plan, $500,000 was allocated for Wells Park Phase 2. Then in the FY 2019 through 2020 Wells Park Improvement Project was budgeted out $1,153,393. In this year's fiscal budget, there is no money allocated for Wells Park project. But where did the over $2 million that's already been allocated go to? Because none of the project except for the fencing has been completed or even started at Wells Park. This is a very important park to our community, and even though there may be a homeless problem, that does not give the city the right to sweep it under the rug. There are many problems that need to be addressed immediately. Take, for instance, the bathrooms. They are not handicap accessible. There is no soap dispenser, no paper towels, and you have to wash your hands in the same sink that you drink your water from. This could be a direct cause of hepatitis B outbreak once again. It is my opinion that the city government picks and chooses which projects they would like to see done and pay no heed to what the citizens are asking them to do. Stop making promises that you won't keep or starting projects you don't finish. Remember, fellas, this year is an election year. And that concludes the comment.
Thank you very much. Graham, did you want to comment on this or not?
Just really quickly, we have installed the fencing and including the gates to the park. We've also installed additional lighting in the parking lot, so that part is completed. And that is really part of Phase 1. I think the public commenter is correct that we are behind in accomplishing Phases 2 and 3. Some of those phases require some general fund money that I'm a little reluctant to commit right now because of where we're at financially. But there are a lot of CDBG dollars that are tied up in this, and that we are moving forward on those improvements that don't involve general fund. But there's a lot of priorities happening. So this has slowed things down, but it's something that we're working on.
Thanks for answering that, Grant. Any of the council members want to comment?
Well, I think we need to hold our general fund money because we're going to have quite a hit to the general fund because of the sales tax and property tax and things like that. Property tax is a little slow getting paid according to the article in paper, and we know the general fund with the sales tax is going to take a big hit this year. So.
A tough year. All right, thanks for the comment. There are no written communications, and we are now at public hearings. Item 11 is the adoption of the proposed 2020 5-year program of projects for the Sandag Regional Transportation Improvement Program. Staff, would you tell us about this, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mayor and members of the council. It's Mario Sanchez. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. This item's before you. It's our requirement, our public hearing for every 2 years, Sandag requires local agencies to update the RTIP to allocate funds for our planned transportation projects, such as our overlay, traffic signals, sidewalks, curb ramps, and so forth, and our grant funding matches. And our list of projects is there in front of you. And our fiscal impact is that we'll receive over $14 million over the next 5 years to help fund these improvements. And open up to questions if you have any.
Council, any questions on this?
No.
Angela, do you have any speaker cards on this item?
No, sir, no comment cards.
All right. I'm going to make a motion then to close the public hearing.
Second.
Mayor Wells, your vote.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Ortiz.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Goebel.
Yes.
Councilmember Kendrick.
Yes.
And Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Would you like to make a motion or discuss more?
Move to adopt the next resolution for the adoption of the proposed 2020 5-year program for projects for the Sandag Regional Transportation Improvement Program.
Second.
All right, move to second.
Mayor Wells, your vote. Deputy Mayor Ortiz.
Yes.
Councilmember Goebel.
Yes.
Councilmember Kendrick.
Yes.
And Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Fantastic. We're moving through quickly. We have 2 administrative reports on today's agenda. Item 12 is an item to consider canceling a summer council meeting. And staff, would you tell us about this, please?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, typically or historically, the city has canceled one of its meetings in the month of August. We've usually done that the second meeting of August, but reserving the right to or the ability to call that meeting if we really need to. But staff would recommend that we cancel the August 25th, 2020 meeting at this time and leave that canceled unless it's otherwise needed.
Okay, Angela, are there any speaker cards for this?
No cards, sir.
All right. Council, it's just a house cleaning thing. We do this every year unless anybody has any objections.
We need a motion, Morgan.
Yeah, I'll move to adopt.
Second.
Mayor Wells, your vote, please.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Ortiz.
Yes.
Councilmember Goebel.
Yes.
Councilmember Kendrick.
Yes.
Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Thanks, Angela. The last administrative report is item 13, which is an update on impacts of the COVID-19. I'll ask staff to introduce this item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. If we're gonna turn on a PowerPoint presentation at this time. If we go to the next slide, we wanted to cover a couple sort of updates. If we can go to the next slide, please. we want to hit a couple items. I think that the council, important for them to have, and also the public. We wanted to just talk about an update on some of the COVID-19 information that's affecting the county and the city. I'm going to turn the time over for the majority of the presentation to Clay Shane, our finance director, that's going to talk about how what the economic output looks like, how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting our CalPERS calculations, looking at how all these factors influence our 5-year financial outlook, which we just presented to the council a few meetings ago. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about the fiscal year 2021 annual budget, kind of what we anticipate in terms of some shortfall, and then really on some of the schedule moving forward in presenting and adopting a budget. So with that, we can go to the next slide. Just really quickly, within San Diego County, there has been 6,797 confirmed cases. It's one of the things that we've been asking for is some better data on recovery rates and or current active cases, because that number can be a little deceptive. But I think the number that's really important to look at is ultimately even more important than hospitalizations, which we've had 1,244 as of yesterday, but it's really the number of deaths countywide, and looking at not only deaths, but the rate of increases of deaths. If council's interested, I have a slide that shows that rate. Actually, I don't have it on this one, but another one. But if you look at another presentation I have shows that over time, initially there was a significant increase in the number or percent increase of number of deaths, but it really is averaging 1% to 2% increase of deaths a day now. So I think we are slowing down. I think some of the things that we've implemented county-wide, city-wide is actually making a significant difference. In the city of El Cajon, there's 432 confirmed cases as of yesterday. We do know that about half of those cases come from some sort of a convalescent facility. We also know that the majority of deaths that we believe are coming from the city of El Cajon, although we don't have specific data on this, we believe those are also from convalescent facilities as well. If we go to that's kind of the data. If we can talk about some of the reopening of the economy, and this graph was put together over the weekend, and it's already a little bit out of date, but the governor has proposed several different stages of where we're at. And as you probably are aware, the county has given us the opportunity to accelerate some of those stages based on approval and based on accomplishing certain metrics. So if we can go to the next slide, this graph just shows all the stages, but I want to just focus on stage 2 and the accelerated stage 2. These were actually opened as of last week and the week before. The accelerated stage 2 was approved by the governor for the city. So there are opportunity to have dine-in restaurants as long as they meet certain conditions, and those conditions were just laid out, some of those in more detail today. There's also the ability to have in-store sales for retailers. We know that the mall plans on reopening this Friday. We also know that swap meets are available. That doesn't really affect us, but it does our neighbors. We can go to the next slide. Some of the other accelerated programs include research labs are available to be opened, peer support groups, youth sports clubs. We heard just today that one-on-one sports tutoring will be available, salons and fitness centers. Now, there's a lot of rules and regulations around salons, including we don't think that applies to nail salons, but it does for hair cutting under certain parameters, non-city pools like HOA pools, and then outdoor religious services. Over the weekend, as you heard, the governor announced some more regulations or some loosening of regulations on religious services. So either 25% of capacity of a facility or 100 people, whichever is the lesser number. So there are some positive movements to reopening the economy. The later stages, which we're not quite there yet, would be movie theaters, which has a big impact on us. religious services, as I just talked about, sports leagues, arts and culture venues. We're still unsure whether this applies to the Magnolia or not, or that really applies more to a club, which would be under stage 4. Colleges and universities should be opening up soon, as well as personal services, and that would include all hair salons, nail salons, those types of things. The last stage would be the ultimate stage, in which we're back to normal, having full-on stadiums full of people and conferences and concerts and theme parks. So that's kind of the reopening plan that is being presented by the governor. As you know, the county has a lot of rules and regulations around each of those things, and we'll be working with them closely to understand what those are. As we get new information about the new rules, and specifically for the restaurants and other businesses that have very specific regulation, we'll be putting that on our website, and we're getting that information out to our business community. As you know, the council approved several some significant funding for different groups. As you recall, we have 3 city response teams, one that focuses on residents, one on businesses, and one on the homeless community. As of April 24th, we deployed $133,000 in food assistance, and a lot of that has already been implemented. I think there's probably continues to be a need for that in our community. As of today, we've started the rental and utility assistance programs. We know that over the weekend, I believe we had well over 100 emails about how do I participate, and so we've been referring those to our social service partners, and so that will continue to go. And we had some social media outreach on that over the weekend. We've started some online rec classes already. I'll show you 2 images of that in just a minute. We've waived all the sewer late fees, and we've also created a COVID-19 resource page. Next slide. So this shows an example of one of our rec leaders doing a Zoom remote class, and you can see the participants in the class, and the participants just log in and they can watch her. And we have a makeshift studio in one of our rooms. You can see the lights and the cameras and all the action going on. If you can go to the next slide, this shows our cooking class. So we have chefs in the making, or top chef in the making. So we're hoping that this is just one of the ways that, even though we're isolated from our public, that we're able to show our community that we're still here for them and that we're doing things to help them out. We can go to the next slide. So for the business community, we've dedicated a resource page on our website. We're allowing businesses to register through our new city app so they can be acknowledged and people can search for them. As you know, we've halted our banner enforcement program, and we've also waived penalties for business licenses through the end of the year, and we're extending the sewer billing late fee through December as well. We've really increased outreach and communication. We've sent out multiple emails and letters to our business community. We're also working to, we recognize that one of the ways that restaurants can offer dining is by expanding their footprint. And we know that a lot of business restaurants have the capacity to do that, whether they push out into a parking lot or push out into a back area, which may not be allowed under their current conditional use permit or under their current permit. So we're instituting a program in which we'd like to streamline a temporary use permit. We'd like to offer it at a no fee amount. So we need to have some mechanism to make sure it meets certain standards, but we'd like to charge no fee for that. That does require city council concurrence. So at the end of this presentation, we'd like to hear your thoughts on waiving that fee. And then we would also, we'd make it as least bureaucratic as possible. We do need to make sure that everything's lined up. Now, this raises the question about expanding into the public right-of-way. We know some of our businesses have the ability to expand onto a sidewalk. There are some more complicated issues relating to that. Liability. If a business extends into the public right-of-way, are we liable for ensuring the 6-foot distancing or meeting the other regulations? There's insurance requirements. Our current zoning code actually requires a business utilizes the public right-of-way to obtain a conditional use permit or to modify their CUP. So we're working out some of the nuances and trying to understand how we can present a policy recommendation to the city council regarding that. But in the meantime, those that are not using the public right-of-way, we think there's an opportunity to enable them to expand in order to be in business faster, sooner, and to serve our public and get their cash registers ringing again. Next slide. We've also have a city response team that's reached out to the homeless community. We've entered into an agreement with ECTLC. They've reopened their shelter and they have beds available for the homeless community. We've also started a hotel motel voucher program through Home Start. So that kicked off earlier today. We are providing transportation for free through the police department to ECTLC. So if we find somebody that would like to use our program, we will get them there. And then the county's providing transportation for those that are at risk to get to the convention center or to another motel room. I'm just going to comment on this. One of our frustrations at the staff level is that the state of California has provided millions of dollars to open up facilities like the convention center, yet very few people have been able to utilize those, including our own homeless population. So as council members see opportunities to talk to state officials, I think it's important that we point out that the majority of this money is not serving our community in any way, shape, or form. Lastly, the rental assistance program, which is really helping to prevent evictions and to prevent homelessness, also kicked off today. This is a bold experiment. It'll be interesting to see. No one else in the county is doing this right now. So it'll be interesting to see how well this program's received. And we know that there's going to be some growing pains as we explore this program, but maybe this is an area of further opportunity if more CARES money becomes available to the city. So with that, maybe this is a good chance to break before we start talking about budget type issues. If the council has questions specifically about what the city has been doing or what's happening at the county level. Any questions?
I got a question. When you say the money for the convention center really isn't helping us, what do you mean? We can't take our homeless down there for service?
To Mr. Goebel, that's exactly right. Unless that homeless individual has an underlying health condition or has been determined by somebody other than us, by the county, that they are in risk, then you cannot go to the convention center. So it's a very small percentage of our homeless population that can take advantage of those millions of dollars of state funds.
So the convention center is for people at risk, but not necessarily sick?
That's correct.
Okay. Because we've set aside thousands of motel rooms for people who are sick to separate themselves from co-inhabitants of apartments or something like that. And those are underutilized as well, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Any other questions before I turn the time over to Mr. Shane?
Graham, did you want us to discuss the potential for expanding restaurants' footprints now or after the presentation?
I think we should probably do that after, because that would I'd like sort of council concurrence.
Great.
Maybe on that and maybe some other issues too. So
great.
I'd be wait for that.
Sounds good.
Okay, Clay.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, distinguished members of the City Council. Wanted to briefly discuss today a few items affecting our budget looking forward into fiscal year 21. To kick us off, I'd like to discuss the economic outlook, starting with gross domestic product. After many years of bouncing around slow but steady growth in the 2 to 3% range, GDP has come back in for the first quarter of 2020, that's January through March, actually shrinking, negative 4.8% in the first quarter. Additionally, in inflation, which has also been fairly slow, between 1 and 2% typically, has dropped significantly, and as a result of the last 2 months, has dropped on an annual basis to 0.3%. Unemployment, which I'll get a little bit more detail here in a moment, with the following slide. But I also typically will look at housing and construction numbers to add a little bit of color to the economic data we're seeing. And just as recently as this morning, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Department of Commerce released residential home sales this morning. And looking at it, had some interesting information. The sales volume, the number of houses on the market, as well as those being sold, has been surprisingly stable over the last few years. But what we noticed in the data was that the median home price of these sales, and keeping in mind this is at a national level, dropped fairly significantly, quite a bit more than the average. And I think what we're seeing there is a tremendous increase in the number of sales of lower valued homes as a comparison to the higher value homes that are sold. That becomes relevant a little bit later on in our discussion as we start discussing property tax. Back to unemployment. This is a startling graph. I like to present this a little bit differently than a lot of other places. I like to show unemployment as a negative number, so bad things go down and good things go up. But it's the same information. We saw a dramatic drop off in unemployment starting in March, but really it went pretty aggressively into April. Now, keep in mind, these numbers are through the end of April, and official releases at the national level from the Bureau of Labor Statistics won't be released to the beginning of June, so we may have those at the next meeting. But as of the official numbers through April, unemployment was at 14.7% nationally, and that's after bouncing around between 3 and 5% for several years. A lot of preliminary numbers that are already out into the public are suggesting that we may see unemployment rates in the 30s through the end of May, and that's something we definitely want to pay attention to refresh our memories, as well as to bring this up for some of the public that maybe didn't see this graph at a previous meeting. There's a very high correlation between sales tax revenues and the unemployment rate. Simply speaking, people don't have jobs, they don't spend money, and that has an impact in operations. So we usually see the double whammy of our population unemployed, and that's bad directly for them and their families. But additionally, it's also difficult for governments to operate and provide the same levels of service. Using that as our segue into talking about revenues broadly, we're going to take a considerable amount of time talking about sales tax in the following slides. So if you'll allow me to skip ahead to property tax, we just recently received our preliminary assessed valuation from the county assessor's office, and it does show a little bit better increases in property tax value than we were initially expecting. Property tax changes happen very, very slowly, and there's typically a fairly significant lag from when the event occurs. While we leave the door open that we may be negatively impacted as a result of COVID-19 in property tax receipts, we may not see those for quite some time. Our primary concern with property tax, as I was talking about in new home sales earlier, as property values are turned over at a lower value, their corresponding assessed valuation from the county will be down, and that will eventually lead to lower property tax numbers. Additionally, transient occupancy tax, which is commonly referred to as the hotel tax, has taken a hit in just about every jurisdiction, frankly, probably in the country, pretty significantly in San Diego County. Our hotels in the city of El Cajon typically don't do a whole lot of tourism, but they do support businesses, out-of-state construction, things like that. And frankly, with the economy slowing as rapidly as it has, there has been a corresponding decrease in hotel demand as well. As this event progresses, we will begin to see this in other revenue sources being impacted as well. As development slows, so too will be the permitting process and revenues generated from that, and another variety of other sources. However, sales tax is, of course, the elephant in the room. Before getting too deeply into sales tax, this is another slide that we presented earlier that I wanted to refresh our memories on a little bit. This is the pattern we experienced during the Great Recession approximately 10 years ago. The blue line represents the actual general fund revenues for that period of time. And the orange line is the hypothetical amount we would have experienced or would have expected to experience had the Great Recession not occurred. I wanted to draw attention to a change in the slope of the blue line that occurred in approximately FY10. You notice that that starts to creep back up fairly steeply, and that's the result of two events. One, that was the beginning of the recovery of the economy generally, but that also was the start of the Proposition J additional sales tax measure. So what this chart demonstrates is it took many years just to get back to where we were before the event, many years, in fact, almost a decade before we caught back up to where we should have been. And a lot of that was a result of the passage of Prop J. If you look at this graph now, you'll see a very familiar shape to the previous slide. The blue line represents our projected sales tax before the COVID-19 event. This information is provided by an outside consulting firm that specializes in this kind of work that we rely on for information. However, none of our information is solely bound to a single source. It does go through a validation process against other sources, and we're very confident of the results that we have both prior to and after COVID. As I said, the blue line represents the pre-COVID projected sales tax, and the orange line represents the revised sales tax projections after that result. If you notice the slope of the line, the orange line is pretty much parallel to that of the blue line. We just had a resetting of the table that we expect in FY21 as a result of this event. Just to put scope and scale into the conversation, the gap below the blue line, between the blue line and the orange line, represents approximately $42 million worth of sales tax revenue that has disappeared as a result of this event for the period displayed here. This chart shows basically the same event, just a slightly different time frame. Rather than looking out multiple years, this is a very short-term comparison. The previous one showed expected sales tax by year. This demonstrates sales tax receipts that we anticipate on a monthly basis. Again, the blue line was prior to COVID-19, and the orange line is our revised projections. During the 20-month period demonstrated here, there's an expected $11.5 million shortfall in sales tax. Another large concern of ours as a result of COVID-19 is the impact on CalPERS and our employee benefit costs from them. When we met last or discussed the topic last, there was a very big concern about FY20 investment earnings, and that is still the case. However, at the time we spoke last, CalPERS had estimated their annual earnings up to that point at negative 4%, and we estimated a price tag that went along with that of somewhere between $30 and $50 million. That was through the end of March. I spoke to our actuary at CalPERS, which reported that through the end of April, their annual returns were up quite a bit to 1%. Now, obviously, there's going to be a pretty significant impact as a result of that, but I'll take 1% over negative 4% any day. That still represents approximately $21 million added to our unfunded liability, which it won't be reflected in our annual contributions until 2022, but we do expect fairly significant increased costs as a result of their performance. So going back to the work we originally presented, the original 5-year outlook is demonstrated in this table. these numbers, by this point, you've seen a couple of times, so I won't read them to you. I would like to draw attention to a couple of things on here. One, if you look down the column for projected inflows, you'll see a fairly consistent growth year to year. Likewise, projected outflows, you see a very consistent growth year to year. The difference in those outflows and inflows is reflected in the change in fund balance column, and that is the gap that we have to close each budget year. It is our expected amount that expenditures exceed revenues, and we were originally anticipated going into the fiscal year 21 budget process needing to close a gap of approximately $1.4 million. This is a very common thing in these projections. We know we have work to do on an annual basis, and seeing a gap of that size does not concern me. It's kind of normal housekeeping. It's part of the annual budget process. However, once we started rolling our new sales tax projections into this environment, we started seeing a revised outlook that looks like this. Again, what I'd like to draw attention to are pretty much the same things from the previous. If you look down the projected inflow columns, you see a very significant drop-off in revenues from FY20 to 21, and then it picks up and returns to the familiar pattern of moderate increases year to year. However, if you look at the projected outflow column, you don't see the similar corresponding drop in expenditures, and it continues to grow. In fact, it's growing a little bit more rapidly as a result of the CalPERS issues. What that has left us with for FY21, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in just a couple of slides, that means the gap we have to close as part of the FY21 budget process is approximately $8.7 million. Now, this is a lot easier to read than either of those two tables, but the contents are presented here graphically. And what this demonstrates is the red line represents our projected general fund expenditures. Now, those are unmitigated expenditures without managerial decisions being made to change those, our starting point, if you will. The solid blue line represents where we thought we were at the beginning of our 5-year outlook planning process. And the difference between those two lines represents the shortfall, the gap that we have to close moving forward. However, once our revised revenue projections are taken into account, we see the relationship change to the dotted light blue line, and the gap between the red line and the blue line is the expected gap that we have to close over the next few years. Diving down to a little bit more detail, for FY20, we're currently projecting revenues to total approximately $76.4 million, with expenditures totaling about $77 million, leading to a net impact of a decrease in fund balance of approximately $587,000. During the budget process for FY20, we expected revenues at the end of the year to total $77.2 and expenditures to total $78.1 million. We started the year anticipating of having to use reserves to the tune of approximately $900,000. As we've seen revenues decrease, we've also been able to keep expenditures under control and have matched that drop off pretty closely. So while we were planning use of reserves approximately $900,000, we're currently on track of about $600,000. Both of which are well within our margin of error on our projection. So how we've been able to mitigate this shortfall are three primary courses of action. The first of which, we immediately implemented a hiring freeze for all but the most essential personnel. We've also dismissed our part-time and seasonal staff, interns, that sort. And we've also curtailed any non-essential operations in order to mitigate the dropping revenue. As we look into 2021, as I said earlier when we were talking 5-year outlook, we originally projected a gap in the budget between revenues of expenses of approximately $1.4 million. We have since revised those numbers, and we're expecting to have a gap to close of approximately $8.7 million. And how an agency does this is through a combination of three basic approaches. One are we take the easy solutions. And unfortunately, easy solutions aren't very many, and frankly, they've largely been squeezed out of city operations quite some time ago. Easy solutions typically are things like not funding new vehicle purchases for a year. Putting expenditures like that on hold gives us a little bit of relief. As I said, there's not a lot of rocks to look under in that category. The second, and this is an area that city staff has excelled at over the last several years, but that's creative solutions, and that's just finding a different way of doing business. The example that comes to mind is something like solar power, investing in solar panels at our facilities to reduce our power bill. You know, that's doing business in a different way that gives us some budgetary relief. But sadly, often these situations lead to difficult solutions, and there's no other way of putting this, but that represents decreases in staffing levels with corresponding reductions in service levels. And we've seen this widely spread throughout the state as a result of this event. Unfortunately for us, those difficult solutions are perhaps even more so than a lot of agencies. This chart represents general fund staffing levels, full-time equivalent employees, for approximately a 30-year period. And you've seen, most notably during the last 10 years or so, we've really plateaued on the size of the general fund staff. We have kind of have found the sweet spot in balancing the appropriate level of service delivery with the staff required to do so. The difficulty here, and most notably, is if you look at the FY20 number of 367 employees, approximately 250 of them are in the two public safety departments. The implications of that probably should not be taken lightly. So how do we close the gap? Well, there's a few different things we're looking at right now and we're working through. One is looking at staffing levels. There's several different tools that we can employ in combination. The first is freezing positions. Oftentimes there are certain projects and things like that that we can say, we don't need to do them right now. We can wait a little while, and therefore we don't need to fill a vacant position in order to do that work. Additionally, limiting overtime is a regular go-to in times like this. Overtime is typically a very expensive way to staff. It has its implications, but that's a regular go-to. Additionally, there's no way of ducking it. Reducing staffing levels is something that simply needs to be discussed at this level. As I said, that does have a corresponding impact on service delivery, and there's no way to avoid that. For non-personnel costs, materials and supplies and services is always something we're looking at. And that can be lower cost vendors providing services to the city. That may be actually the material that we're using to conduct our business. Material supplies do not represent a very huge portion of our annual budget, but every dollar counts now more than ever. Additionally, the city hosts and runs a number of special events, and I think we're all in favor of the dramatic positive impacts on the community that these events represent, but when taken into consideration against core services, perhaps these are nice to haves. Additionally, and this is one that probably can't get enough attention, but new sources of revenue is something we should explore as well. While it's real easy to fall into the trap of cutting spending, generating new revenues is always a good way out of this situation. And additionally, use of reserves is something that we should prepare ourselves for the next few years. We've worked very hard to build these reserves in order to protect service levels in an event like this, and here we are, and now's the time to discuss using them. So those are some of the options we have at our disposal to work on this issue. And to discuss the timeline of addressing this, I'd like to hand it back over to Graham.
Thank you, Clay. You know, one of the things that we are hoping to have done is be before you tonight, kind of with a preliminary budget plan. But as you can tell, we're not quite there. Part of the rationale for that is there's so many unknowns, and we won't know all the knowns until, frankly, halfway into the next fiscal year. But we were waiting on a couple big sales tax reports to come in, and that property tax report that Mr. Shane referenced as well. So I think now that we have that, we can present something to the council. What we'd like to do is at the next council meeting is present what we think the revenues are going to come in at, and then look at capital budget. And then if there's any expenditures that have a big policy implication, like canceling an event or reducing services, these are areas that we'd like some city council input on at the June 9th meeting. And then with that feedback, we can present a final expenditure plan. That also gives us time to work with our labor groups, which we've been in contact with over the last month, talking about ways that we can work with them to reduce costs as well. So that's kind of the timeline. That's kind of how the council is going to roll into the budget preparation process. And if we need to hold another special meeting, if we're not quite there on June 23rd, we can always reserve the following meeting on June 30th to adopt a final budget and meet our deadline. I mean, there are some cities that are already looking at expanding past the June 1st deadline to have a budget prepared. I don't think we're there. I think we should set a goal to have an adopted budget by July 1st. But it's an option that some cities are looking at. So with that, Mr. Shane or I are here to answer any questions that you may have of things that you heard today, get some direction and feedback. And specifically, I'd like some direction on how you'd like us to handle the temporary use permit fees. So with that, council.
Hi, this is Gary Kendrick.
Great.
I've heard from some restaurants downtown, they would really like to put out the seating out front, and I like the idea of zeroing out the minor use permit fee of $700. There's also an encroachment permit for $200 that I'd like to see zeroed out, and I would like to, and maybe we can change the zoning that will allow us to do this. But some of these businesses are really on the ropes right now, and I think it's because of this state of emergency. I think we should talk about having an emergency ordinance, which I know takes 4/5 the votes, to give these businesses a chance to expand their footprint, because a lot of people are just on the edge of going out of business. And I don't want to see a bunch of empty storefronts and people lose their life savings and livelihood. So if we could move really fast on this, I would really appreciate that.
This is Phil. I'm going to have to agree with Councilmember Kendrick. I think anything we can do to help out our businesses, especially, Graham, I think you used the phrase expand their footprint. If restaurants are only able to operate at 25% capacity, let's try and help them increase their capacity so we can get those registers ringing, as you put it. Also, to keep in mind too, if they're expanding into parking lots, they're probably going to want to put up umbrellas. Dining in El Cajon in June, blacktop isn't probably the most pleasurable experience. So we got to keep that in mind too, to work with those businesses that, just because they have seating outside doesn't mean people are going to want to dine there. We got to make sure that we're working with them to make it a friendly dining experience, especially in the downtown area. I feel like, the city and previous councils worked so hard to really get that downtown area thriving, and we don't want to see those businesses leave because of this. So anything we can do to help them, I'm all for.
Before we start talking about voting, ask Angela if she has these speaker cards.
Sir, we have no cards for this item.
All right.
I have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Clay, you showed about a little over $8 million shortfall on our sales tax. I think that's probably very, very optimistic. because I think a lot of these businesses that are on the edge, I think we're going to have a number of bankruptcies, closings of business fronts and things like that. I think it's going to be a very, very difficult time because of the shutdown and businesses not being able to operate for a couple of months. I know even car dealers are having a rough time. We may lose some of them also, especially used car dealers, because they haven't been selling any cars at all, zero. And I think that your $8.7 billion drop in sales tax is very liberal, and I think it probably would be 10 or 11 million. And I'm cautious to, I know with the PERS coming up and everything, increase in deductions for the pensions and all, I think we're in for a worse time than what we're predicting. My standpoint.
If I could weigh in on that really fast, I think you're right. We don't know what kind of recovery we're going to have. I think the graph that Mr. Shane showed is sort of the slow recovery. There's some economists that think that we're going to bounce back pretty quickly because there's this pent up demand and buy new cars. I don't know if I prescribe to that thinking. I like to think that way, but we do know that there are some things that occurring, some changes, some shifts in the economy, such as online purchases. We know that we're going to benefit from that. So I think with a lot of this loss of revenue, we think there's going to be some businesses, primarily the online businesses, that we're actually going to see some uptick. So that may mitigate some of the slam that some of our businesses are going to experience. But I think you're exactly right, Mr. McClellan, that we don't know how bad this is going to be. And I think it's probably prudent to plan for the worst. But at the same time, I think we got to be a little cautious that we don't blow up. I don't know the right word to use, but just blow everything up, and then it ends up not being as bad as we thought. So I think we're going to try to present some realistic expenditure plans that gives council opportunity to hedge their bets on how good or bad this recession ends up being.
Tim, when you come back in June, can you bring us some ideas that you have on increasing revenue? I think that's to me that's the most palatable way to look at this. It's always better to increase revenue than to increase taxes or to make cuts.
Certainly, and just so you know, the low-hanging fruit has already been obtained by most cities, right? So I mean. Putting solar, for example, on all of our facilities, that can't happen overnight. That will take time to implement. We have another program. We can lay that out at the next meeting. There's a series of processes that have to go forward to happen. We probably wouldn't see that income until about the middle of the fiscal year. So that is the ideal, but they're not easy, and they take time and sometimes some investment in order to come to fruition.
I have a quick question. California's reopening process is slower than other states, and I know, our economy in El Cajon is going to be different than other states. But are we watching other states to see their economies? Other states that are opening up, I know, for instance, Georgia, Florida. These states have opened up on a lot quicker of a timeline. So are we looking at their local economies to see and maybe make some predictions as to how quickly that rebound is going to happen, if at all?
So yes and no. I mean, one, we are looking at other places, specifically on how other places are dealing with concerts or performing arts centers, right? That's really important to us, some of the day-to-day stuff. The problem, Mr. Ortiz, is that any economic data is 3 to 6 months lagging. So even a state that's opened up a month ahead of California, we really won't know its economic impact at least for another 2, 3, 4 months from now. So that is one of the challenges that we have.
Okay, thank you.
No, but their bankruptcies would not be as many as what we would have in the community based upon the businesses that can't make it and won't make it because we had a number of bankruptcies during the 08-09 time period, and a lot of places went out of business. And I know I closed mine prior to that, just time, so that I got out at a good time. But I know a lot of them that didn't, and they suffered, and finally they went bankrupt. That's really a hard blow to the revenues that come into the city because those businesses just aren't producing anything then. So I think that we need to be a little more conservative on our estimates.
Well, if everybody's ready, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the report and encourage the staff to bring forth some creative ideas on increasing revenues and decreasing costs for the meeting in June?
Yes, June 9th.
I'd like to weigh in on a comment, if I could.
Sure, Steve.
The expenditure plan is scheduled for June 23rd. I think it's not good for us to vote on a budget on the same day. I think we need to at least give a few days for perhaps those impacted or those who have an interest to give feedback. It just would seem odd to get presented the plan and vote on the same day.
I don't have an objection. Can you rearrange the schedule, Graham, so that it would happen in August?
I'll be honest. I prefer having a special meeting on June 30th, so we present an expenditure plan to the council on on your regular scheduled meeting, and then have a special meeting to adopt the budget. I think that's a good message, but I'll let the council.
I agree.
If I may add,
what Grant was.
Clay, is that you? Go ahead.
yes, if I may add something to the conversation, just to be real clear on what the expectation is, we certainly will circulate a preliminary draft of the budget well in advance of the 23rd's meeting. It won't, under any circumstance, be a surprise now vote affair. I don't know if we'll have necessarily already established venue to discuss anything, but our office would certainly be available to explain what is contained in the draft when it is released. And I will make every effort to have that in advance of the 23rd's meeting.
Well, I think we need at least a week for whenever you release it for the public to provide input. So if you give it to us no later than the 16th, then I'm okay with voting on a budget on the 23rd.
Why don't we do this? I don't know if we can commit to that date. Why don't we do this? Why don't we present the expenditure plan on the 23rd with the option for council to go? I mean, you may see it and go, this is pretty simple. I've heard from folks. I feel comfortable. I don't want to exclude your ability to make a decision on the 23rd. So we'll present the budget, giving you the option to go all the way that day, but we'll also be ready to schedule a meeting on the 30th just in case there's more time to be needed for public input or just for more creative dialogue to occur. Is that fair?
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make that motion then.
And then is the council okay with waiving temporary use permit
You want to handle all in one motion?
or just give direction all in one motion? Yes.
I'm comfortable with waiving those fees at this point. Does anybody else have anything else they want to say?
This is Gary. I'm comfortable with that too.
My suggestion is we leave that for Graham's direction. You've given him direction, let him implement that in the way he thinks is most appropriate rather than taking an action now because it's not on our agenda.
Does he need a certain dollar amount limit or?
Well, I think the suggestion was to waive certain fees that not only in the report but also as discussed by the city council. I don't think he needs a dollar amount except however much his salary is. So you can use that as a bellwether.
Okay. So I'll add to my motion the ability for Graham to waive fees as he sees as appropriate during this period of time, not to exceed 6 months without coming back to City Council. Seem reasonable?
Well, again, you can give. I think he's heard your direction. It's on the agenda for you to hear the update and accept the report. So I think it'd be going beyond the scope of the item if you added more to it and gave direction through a formal motion.
Okay. Well, then I'll make a motion to accept the report and to give Graham the authority to waive the fees as he sees fit.
Second.
All right. Let's vote.
Mayor Wells, your vote, please. Deputy Mayor Ortiz.
Yes.
Councilmember Goebel.
Yes.
Councilmember Kendrick.
Yes.
Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Great. Angela, when we get to item 20, how many cards do you have on that?
I have 7 speaker cards, sir.
All right. So we still have some time. Anybody like to take a break before we continue? We'll plow through. All right. Brave group. Okay. There are no commission reports on today's agenda. Item 14 is my activity report as reported. And then there are no legislative reports on today's agenda. Could I have the activity report for Councilmember Kendrick?
As reported.
McClellan.
As reported.
Goebel.
As reported.
Ortiz.
As reported.
Item 20 is a joint report for the Deputy Mayor Ortiz and Councilmember Goebel. Gentlemen, please tell us about this report.
Well, I would like to thank Councilmember Ortiz for joining me in this item. It certainly kind of borders, at least the test site that we're looking at borders District 3 and District 4. As you may have previously known, that Meridian Baptist constructed one sample micro emergency shelter on their property last July. It's a little under 100 square feet, if I remember, with a roof and a bunk bed and a porch. Very nice facility. So the city zoning code requires a modification in order to allow these homes to be used as residential facilities for people who are temporarily homeless as bridge housing. Meridian has partnered with Amicus to construct and operate these, and so we're asking staff to come back no later than August 11th with a suggestion on how to do zoning and operation of these houses in this program.
All right. Why don't we hear from the public, and then we'll ask questions of staff.
Thank you, sir. The first out of 7 comment cards comes from Herbert Kelly, Amicus board member, and he wrote, I would like to share my support in favor of the City of El Cajon adopting zoning changes that allow placement of tiny houses on suitable properties as potential housing for homeless people. The use of tiny house villages as a transitional housing option provides another resource in helping our neighbors off our streets. These sleeping cabins allow people to rest in a quite secure, socially distanced space. This creates the opportunity for healing and a place where social services can be provided to the members of the village. My expectation is that members of the villages will transition into permanent housing as it becomes available. More so today than any time in the last 10 years, I see developers now building projects with low and lowest cost housing units as part of their development product mix. I encourage the City Council to adopt changes in El Cajon zoning ordinances that will permit these tiny house villages to be located, built, and occupied. Next comment is an anonymous comment. I am very proud of council for agreeing to fix the zoning for this project to take place. Although this project was not initiated by the city, I am glad to see that the city is supporting this project, and perhaps the city can see fit, if this project is a success, to adopt a similar project sometime in the future. Next comment is from George Kelly. It says, my name is George Kelly. I live in El Cajon, and I am for the tiny house, or I am in support for the tiny house pilot zoning change. I favor this project to assist in giving the homeless another avenue of a way out from living on the streets. Please allow this change that will allow placement of tiny houses on suitable properties as potential housing for homeless. The use of tiny house villages as transitional housing option provides another resource in helping our neighbors off the streets. These sleeping cabins allow people to rest in a quiet, secure, socially distanced space. This creates the opportunity for healing and a place where social services can be provided to the members of the village. I encourage the City Council to adopt changes in El Cajon's zoning ordinances that will permit this tiny house villages to be located. It says, thank you for your time. The next card is, doesn't have a name, but it says it's from the president of Amicus. Thank you, Councilman Steve Goebel, for introducing an agenda item proposing that the City of El Cajon staff recommend a temporary zoning change allowing a pilot project for the placement of tiny houses on suitable properties as potential homeless housing. I support this proposal. Thank you to the council for your time in considering this proposal. It goes on to say, I am the president of Amicus, a nonprofit organization. We are ready to build 6 emergency sleeping cabins for a pilot project at Meridian Baptist Church. This form of bridge housing will be viable and successful temporary option to help some of the homeless population find the safety, shelter, health, and autonomy they need to get back on their feet. This unique form of housing will help some of the homeless population take the steps necessary to find more suitable permanent housing. Meridian is an appropriate location in that they are already serving many homeless citizens of El Cajon on a regular basis, and the church wants to offer more. We hope the success of this pilot program will be replicated throughout the county of San Diego in conjunction with non-profit property owners and housing providers. We expect the novel coronavirus pandemic will cause an increase in homelessness, and much of the resulting new homeless population will be citizens who were paying rent until they lost their jobs or had to trade work hours for childcare hours when daycare closed. In the coming months, we hope to build temporary bridge housing to help homeless women and children find safe places to live. I encourage you to support this agenda item. Thank you. And we have 3 more cards. The next one, again, does not have a name, but it says he is the lead pastor of Meridian Baptist in El Cajon. And he's a representative of the San Diego Regional Task Force for the Homeless and a member of the Amicus Board of Directors. I would like to thank Council Members Goebel and Ortiz for introducing the agenda item proposing that the City of El Cajon staff recommend a temporary zoning change allowing a pilot project for the placement of tiny houses on suitable properties as potential homeless housing. We are facing a challenge to find adequate places and spaces for people to regain their sense of dignity and purpose. Changing the zoning, even for a pilot project, will give the faith community an opportunity to actively use resources that typically would lay dormant. Recently, the Tender Center for Housing Innovation focused on faith-based organizations and the role they can play in addressing California's shortfall in housing. Released a study showing that approximately 38,800 acres of religious institutions land, equivalent to the size of the city of Stockton, could potentially support new housing development, including in some of our state's highest cost counties. What you as council are proposing to do will tap into the available acreage within the city. Thank you again for your forward thinking, and we look forward to keeping you informed of the progress of our pilot project.
Right.
Two more cards, please.
Okay.
The next one is from Amanda McGimsey. I support the tiny house pilot zoning amendment. There are many churches and nonprofits in El Cajon who would be interested in housing homeless in tiny houses on their properties, but have been prevented from doing so because of zoning restrictions. By lifting the restrictions, the city can make it easier for these entities to help the homeless community. I also urge the council to waive or reduce any permitting fee and streamline the permitting process to reduce wait time. Thank you. And the last comment submitted is from the Secretary of Amicus, but they didn't write their name. As the COVID-19 pandemic expands, it creates an even more desperate situation for those experiencing homelessness on the streets of El Cajon. The need has never been greater for emergency bridge housing options than it is today. To that end, I share my support for exploring temporary zoning changes to help resolve our growing homelessness crisis. As the Secretary of Amicus, I am grateful for your willingness to explore every solution that can be brought to the table, in particular emergency sleeping cabins and tiny houses. I am thankful to the City of El Cajon and to Pastor Roller Slade and the entire Meridian Baptist Church congregation for showing us all what bold leadership looks like. And that concludes the comments, sir.
All right, council, let's discuss it.
Yeah, a couple follow-up comments. The intent of this was to be a temporary ordinance, you heard. So I think we're proposing that it expire December 31st, 2021. That would allow a little over a year for this program to be operated. I don't think the intent is for this to just go on unendingly. It's formatted for a test.
How much do the houses cost?
They can build the houses for $4,000 or less.
So what happens after a year if the people don't like the process?
Well, we'd either vote to continue the zoning change, or they'd have to stop using use them as residences, or they would have the choice to relocate to other places.
Okay.
And also importantly, this is meant to kind of be a pilot for the whole county, not just for El Cajon. Certainly, we've been on the leader end of creative solutions, and this is another one of those, that homelessness is not an issue that is ever solved, but it takes an ongoing creative slate of solutions, and this is another one of those we're looking to test for the whole county.
Do you have any kind of guarantee that these would be people that are from the El Cajon area that are being housed there?
I think that's what we're looking for staff to do as part of their screening of this zoning change. The conditions that they would operate, including screening, hygiene, selection, those kind of things. We look to staff to help guide those decisions.
How about rules? Is it kind of a housing first, do what you want kind of thing, or is it more of a you have to follow rules?
Well, I'm proposing that we let staff vet out those requirements to meet the zoning change.
Okay. And what cities are already doing this?
Right now, it would just be El Cajon, to my awareness. I think they do have some
One in San Diego, I think.
model homes built in the North Park area. I don't know if they're inhabited.
In any other states that you know they're doing this?
I'm not aware of Amicus being other states.
Graham?
So, I mean, we're aware that tiny homes are a popular homeless solution in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington specifically. And when we bring something back, if the council gives us that direction, some of the questions you were asking, Mr. Mayor, are really program questions, not necessarily zoning questions. And so we'll be looking at the zoning itself. We probably are going to be pretty silent on the program stuff, although it does get into some conditional use kind of things that we can build into a zoning ordinance. I think that's one of the reasons why staff likes Mr. Goebel and Mr. Ortiz's suggestion of it being a temporary or having a sunset, because we don't know what the long-term issues would be. And so this does give the council a way out if it ends up not being a good project or a good experiment.
So as we as a council, if we said, look, we want whoever lives there to be from Elkhorn Streets, we want them to be they want to test positive once a week or test negative once a week for the use of drugs and alcohol. Would that be something legally we could require?
I mean, we haven't studied that, but Mr. Mayor, off the top of my head, I don't think we can include that as part of a zoning ordinance.
I would agree with Graham. It's, again, there might be certain conditions like a conditional use permit that you might want to impose, but staff's going to have to go through that process and figure out what would work best for being able to allow these types of uses.
So we're voting on it, just the concept of bringing it back to flesh it out.
Right, because the request is from council members under our policy. We can't make a decision today to just approve it. It's going to have to come back with all the information that staff would prepare. Then it still has to go to the planning commission too. Remember, it's a zoning code amendment.
I also wanted to talk about evictions. So say we had an unruly person that was in there, would we have to go through the entire eviction process as outlined by California law?
That would be a question for whoever the host is leasing the space there. Amicus or whoever else would be the party that owns the units.
Yeah.
More than likely, it's true. Although it may not be it may be treated more as a transient occupancy as opposed to a short term rather than a long term use. I don't know their plans.
Gentlemen, any other questions?
Well, I think that if somebody's going to build one and it costs $4,000, they wouldn't want to tear it down at the end of 2021 just because we can't continue to give them the authority to have it.
I think Mr. Goebel made a comment about relocating. I took a tour of the Amicus house on the Meridian Baptist Church property. I encourage you to do the same, everybody. They are built in a way that they can be, they're kind of prefabbed. So there's a way to take them down and relocate them at another location if there's another appropriate zoning somewhere in the United States. So they do have that as an option.
Something to add, I think there's an incentive for the Amicus group and Pastor Roland Slade at Meridian Baptist to be good neighbors to the city, to continue the program. So I think, even though it's sunsetting, they're going to want it to continue. If the program is accomplishing what we want it to, which is to be transitional housing, to get people a roof over their heads temporarily so they can move back up. So there is that incentive for them to be good neighbors.
My concern, Phil, I mean, having a couple of people in one of these houses shooting crystal meth and being wild, that brings more problems to the city than it helps. Plus, we could be encouraging people to come from Yuma and Orange County and God knows where to come and set up in a tiny house in El Cajon. So I just want to make sure that if we do it, it's in a way that we solve a problem, we don't create more.
Agreed. Totally agree.
I'd like to point out if the council directs staff to do this, this is not zoning specifically for Meridian Baptist Church property. That we have to be inclusive. So staff will work on what we believe is the appropriate type of property and make that recommendation to the elected body. But this is not, just so you understand, this is not solely a Meridian Baptist Church zoning issue.
Yeah, is Meridian going to pay for all this?
Well, if the council directs staff to work on it, this would be council direction. So no, they would not be paying for it. And that's again why it doesn't just affect Meridian. This is a larger city zoning issue rather than a Meridian Baptist issue.
Oh, so you'd be coming back with a budget that the council is going to get involved in as well.
Well, yeah, at this point it's staff time that would be involved.
To clarify, when Graham talks about Meridian wouldn't pay for it, I believe he's talking about the application fee.
Oh no, I meant the building of the construction of homes.
Although you're right. No, the application fee, the zoning process would be handled by the city. That's where the city would end. Once the city zones it appropriately, and if you want to have some sort of a permitting process as part of that, we would do maybe some regulation. But yeah, we wouldn't be involved with the construction of or management of these facilities.
If it were something that was a good thing to do, I'd be comfortable with waiving any kind of zoning fees. I mean, we should do what we can to help this along as long as it's going to be handled correctly. I'm really curious to see what their philosophy is on treating people in these facilities.
Well, I think because Pastor Slade is on the regional task force for the homeless for several years now, he's more experienced on a lot of the issues, not only in El Cajon, but countywide. So I have confidence he's the right guy to be a good host.
I think so too. Well, very well informed on this. All right. Well, would somebody like to make a motion then?
Well, I'll make a motion that City Council directs staff to draft an amended city zoning code as a pilot project to allow placement of tiny houses on suitable properties as a potential homeless housing solution.
Second?
Second.
Okay.
Mayor Wells, your vote, please.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Ortiz,
Yes.
Councilmember Goebel,
Yes.
Councilmember Kendrick,
Yes.
and Councilmember McClellan.
Yes.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Super. All right. There are no general information items for discussion, no first or second readings of ordinances. And we have nothing on our closed session agenda today. And this brings us to adjournment. Today's meeting being adjourned in honor of a good friend of mine, Don Parent, who worked with SDG&E
Yes.
for many, many years. He passed away on May 25th, 2020, after a long illness. Mr. Parent worked with local governments for decades in East County, serving in public affairs roles for San Diego Gas and Electric. He was a booster for East County, taking active and leadership roles in community organizations, including Rotary Clubs, Chambers of Commerce, and the East County Economic Development Corporation. Mr. Parent is survived by his sons, the Mesa City Council member Colin Parent, Evan Parent, and his fiancee, Rhonda James. And he will be greatly missed. Godspeed, Don. And I'd like us to, Don did such a good job, I'd like us to look at giving a proclamation to the family at some point. And this brings us to the adjourned regular joint meeting of the El Cajon City Council and El Cajon Housing Authority, held this 26th day of May 2020. And we're adjourned until Tuesday, June 9th, 2020 at 3 o'clock p.m. And just a question, Graham, are we coming to the end of these Zoom meetings, or do we not quite know yet?
Mr. Mayor, I think we are close. I don't think we've had some direction from the state or the county, but if you look at assemblage for churches, for example, I think we can accomplish what churches are being asked of. And so we'll be asking for some clarification from the county this week about whether those same rules apply to us. And if that's the case, I think we have the ability to separate council members using the full dais of the council dais and staff dais, and segregate participants enough so we could accomplish an in-person meeting shortly.
Well, I like this Brady Bunch thing here we've got going, but I'll be looking forward to all getting back together. Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Okay.